So just to start, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Peter Van Valkenburgh. I'm the executive director of Coin Center, a nonprofit research and advocacy center based in Washington, D.C.
So how much do you expect the DOJ under Trump to change its approach to crypto?
So that is the really important question. I think there's a lot of ostensibly pro-crypto energy coming out of the Trump administration, coming out of Congress as well. But generally, it's been directed at fixing the SEC, fixing the very aggressive policies of Gary Gensler, dropping enforcement actions, and hopefully soon having, the SEC under the guidance of Hester Peirce and Chairman Ueda and incoming chair offer some clear guidance as to who actually needs to register as an issuer, how can secondary markets actually operate, should they be treated as securities exchanges or should they be treated as something else that's maybe overseen by the CMTC. And so a lot of that is moving, and a lot of that is really good. But to my mind, Coin Center's main objective in this space is to make sure that developers of the underlying protocols and software on those underlying protocols, like smart contracts for immutable tools, that they are safe. That's core to our mission. And they faced some jeopardy from the SEC, that's true. But I think the greatest jeopardy that those folks face is from the prosecutions that the Department of Justice has brought against Roman Storm and against the developers of the Samurai Wallet. And I think it doesn't just stop there. I think some people think, oh, well, Roman Storm, you developed Tornado Cash. This is clearly just about people who, were involved in projects that had zero knowledge proof privacy. So if my project is not private, I'm safe. Or, oh, they ended up being used by the Lazarus Group. So this is just a prosecution that rightly is targeting somebody who's working with Lazarus Group. But that's not what Roman Storm's prosecution is about. Roman Storm's prosecution is going after a guy who developed a privacy tool that then, yes, did probably get used by North Korea, but not with his consent or recommendation that they use it or direct assistance in their use of it. It's software. Anyone can pick it up and use it. And when the DOJ brought that case, they didn't say, we have evidence that you knowingly assisted North Korea. They said, we're going to charge you with unlicensed money transmission, which is basically, in many ways, interpreted by the DOJ as a strict liability federal felony. They basically say, look, you were doing money transmission and you didn't have a registration or a license from FinCEN. And therefore, you're guilty of this federal crime. Now, the weird thing about that, and the really bad thing about that for developers in this space, is the DOJ's interpretation of what is money transmission is basically facilitating any kind of movement of funds on chain. And so if you are a money transmitter who needs to get registered for merely facilitating the movement of funds on chain, then almost everyone in our space is potentially on the hook for felony criminal liability. That could even, in theory, apply to a Bitcoin Core developer whose software for the Bitcoin Core protocol facilitates the movement of funds on chain. And so I think the DOJ is way off base with especially that charge against Roman Storm, and it's the same charge they brought against the developers of the Samurai Wallet. And I think that's the biggest threat to folks in our space. So it's my hope that with the Trump administration coming in and hopefully helping tamp down some of the overzealous restrictions and persecutions in our space, we'll also see a change of tone at the DOJ. But unlike the SEC, we haven't yet seen that change of tone. So we're still waiting.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of answers my next question. I'm curious if there's any cases or even specific charges in cases. Like obviously the money transmission is one of two main charges in that Roman Storm case.
What?
Is there any that you see the DOJ possibly dropping?
So there are three charges in Roman's case. There's unlicensed money transmission, there's conspiracy to violate sanctions, and there's conspiracy to launder money. I think all three charges are actually pretty weak when you start to look at the evidence that's been presented, but we haven't gone to trial yet, so there may be evidence, factual evidence, that I'm not aware of. I'm not Roman's lawyer. We wrote an amicus in that case. We want to help, but I'm not privy to all the details, and we'll have to see what the prosecution brings up in trial. The unlicensed money transmission charge, though, isn't a fact-intensive charge. It just says, hey, you were doing money transmission as we interpret it, and you didn't have a license. Therefore, we can charge you with this strict liability felony. And so, to me, if the DOJ is going to drop a charge, that's the first one that should definitely go. It hasn't yet. And they're also bringing the same charge against the Samurai Wallet developers. And we have heard and even confirmed with some folks in the space, though I can't name any names, that there are really active investigations into very large DeFi protocols for unlicensed money transmission. So this is a coordinated agenda, at least from the last administration and the DOJ there. Now, whether it continues into this administration is still an open question. That's one of the main reasons why we're supporting Michael Llewellyn's action for declarative judgment in Texas, saying, hey, I have this protocol I want to publish, but I'm not going to publish it until I know I'm not going to get charged with a federal felony for publishing a protocol.
Like that. And how does Trump firing all Biden era attorneys, that's just, I'm quoting what he said in a True Social post, I believe. How does Trump firing all Biden era attorneys affect these ongoing criminal cases, or does it?
So it is very unusual for the DOJ to drop a prosecution because of a change of administration.
Yeah.
Okay.
The DOJ jealously guards its political independence. And I think historically, the norm has been you would not do that. And as a president, you would not put pressure on them to do that necessarily. You can pardon, you can do a lot of things to fix these problems, but you wouldn't ask them to drop an ongoing prosecution. That said, this seems to be exactly what's happening in the case of Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, who was brought up on corruption charges that have now been dropped by the DOJ after what we hear is pressure from the Trump administration. So maybe this is something that could happen. It's a very difficult question from a rule of law and constitutional standpoint. Like, is this the right way for the executive to act? I think at the very least, we could see the president push the Office of Legal Counsel, not the DOJ, the Office of Legal Counsel, to write an opinion saying money transmission is this, and so these prosecutions don't make sense. That would be a binding legal opinion. So that's a way to change the course of things without just pressuring them to drop the charge. And we're also hopeful that Republicans and Democrats in Congress can work together to pass new legislation that would clarify what is money transmission and what isn't. And I think we could easily convince Trump to sign that if Congress passed that into law. There's a good law called the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act that does just that.
Okay. So this will be the last question. Trump's executive order on digital assets gave the DOJ, along with Treasury, SEC, and any other, quote, relevant agency, 30 days to identify all the regulations, guidance documents, and orders relevant to digital assets. What do you think the DOJ will identify, given how many rules that are not explicitly in reference to crypto are being used against crypto?
Yeah, so I think Trump's executive order on crypto was actually very sober and helpful. What you have there is this request that all the relevant agencies bring to bear the things that they've promulgated or actions they've taken in the last few years that impact crypto, right? Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a lot, and we're going to have to sift through it all. But I think what you'll find then is that the guidance issued by FinCEN in 2019, which is one thing they'll have to bring forward and say this is what this was, which said that you need total independent control to be treated as a money transmitter, is irreconcilable with these prosecutions brought by the DOJ of software developers in the crypto space who were non-custodial. Mm-hmm. And so at the very least, that's going to flag what, to me, is a very obvious contradiction in the law. But to somebody who's in the executive branch or in Congress and hasn't been paying close attention, they might think that these things are different. Again, because of prejudices they might have over the underlying activities of like the Lazarus Group when they use the Tornado Cash smart contract. They might not realize that what's really at stake here is just a developer's right to publish code.
Thank you so much for doing this with Unchained.
Happy to.